for all the viewers joining us at now 1 a.m. Eastern Time, New York time in the United States. We have all evening long been covering an unfolding story that took a very, very tragic turn, with confirmation from Buckingham Palace tonight that the world has lost Princess Diana at age 36.
All right, we're talking with Christopher Anderson this morning, New York Times best-selling author of the book The Day Diana Died. Take a listen to some of the critics and what they have to say about the book. Swift and astounding reading from Time Magazine, a fabulous, addictive read from the Chicago Sun-Times. People Magazine says absolutely riveting. Newsweek, poignant, intimate. Anderson's insight are as sharp as his details. And this week, 20 years ago, we as a nation, or as a world, were all glued to our television sets when we found out that Princess Diana had died in a car accident. And this book, basically, Chris, has some behind-the-scenes stuff, some basically theories, maybe conspiracy theories it addresses. And give us some of the highlights.
Well, let me tell you, first of all, what you said, 20 years, is astounding, isn't it? Nobody believes in that long.
Yeah, makes me feel real old.
It is, and it seems that's because the event seems so surreal. It didn't. I think a lot of people still feel as if Diana is still around, and that's probably because we're so fascinated with William and Harry and Kate Middleton and what's going to happen, and Charlotte and Prince George. In the book, I did was really talk to Diana's. I'm kind of Team Diana, so I talked to Diana's closest friends and people who could tell me what was going on in her life around the time of her death, but also to the people who were there when she was in the tunnel, the people who were witnesses to the accident, the first doctor on the scene to treat her. He didn't even recognize, didn't know who she was. I report what her last words were. I write about the priest who was sat with her for 4 hours. He gave her the last rites. The first moment when Charles laid his eyes on the dead body of Diana and the fact that he almost passed out and had to be held up. A lot of the detail around the funeral. And it was a time that the whole world just stopped in its tracks, I think. 2.5 billion people watched that funeral, the largest television audience in the world. That's how people felt about Diana at the time.
And I think this leads into why 20 years later this is still such a big story, such big news, is because, there are still unanswered questions, still conspiracy theories about it. For instance, was Diana pregnant when she died? Because a lot of people think she was pregnant.
No, all the evidence is that she wasn't, and blood tests were done, post-mortem and whatnot. She wasn't pregnant. But, when the fact of the matter is that she was convinced for a long time that she would be murdered. And she told a lot of people that. I interviewed a number of people that this was something that she said frequently. Even a few weeks before her death, she wrote to her lawyer, Lord Mishkin, and said, look, I'm afraid I'm about to be killed in an arranged car crash. So when somebody predicts their death, and it happens, obviously there's reason to investigate. But the sad truth is, after you run down every trail trying to establish some sort of plot, they all unravel. The fact of the matter is, she was killed by a drunk driver, the driver of her car, Henri Paul. He had 3 times the legal limit of alcohol in his system. He was taking a bunch of very powerful antidepressants. He was not qualified or licensed to drive the car he was driving. And, of course, the paparazzi were in hot pursuit. And sadly, that's how Diana died.
Now, why did she think she was going to be killed?
Well, of course, she was a thorn in the side of the monarchy. She was nothing but trouble for 17 years. And the reason was that she wasn't going to just take it the way the other royal wives had when her husband was cheating on her. Charles was never in love with Diana. She was in love with him. And, he was in love with somebody else, Camilla Parker Bowles.
I think people forget this was basically an arranged marriage.
Totally. As a matter of fact, this kind of bizarre thing is that Camilla and another one of Charles' mistresses, Lady Tryon, handpicked Diana to be Charles' wife. They picked her because, he needed an heir and he needed a young aristocratic wife, and she fit the bill. But they never had any intention of stopping. Camilla and Charles were going to keep their affair going, and Diana wasn't going to stand for it. And so, in addition to that, she went out and embraced all of these causes that the royal family thought were too controversial. She was the first public person to hug AIDS patients and visit homeless centers and that sort of thing, and to take her kids along, William and Harry. And this is something the royal family rubbed them the wrong way, and Diana knew it made them very angry. And when Diana started dating Dodi Al-Fayed, who was a Muslim, that raised some issues because, to have a Muslim stepfather to the future King of England, who's the head of the Church of England, that would have caused trouble in the royal family.
Growing up, my grandmother had such a fascination with the royal family. So I grew up watching a lot of the videos and, her teaching me about everything. And as a matter of fact, I was born a month after Prince William. And so she always had this idea in her mind that we would marry one day. But that's another story. Oh. But had you always had a fascination with the royal family yourself? Or how did this come about that you chose to write this book?
I was at Time magazine as an editor for years. And then I was one of the founding editors of People magazine. And so I was in charge of the Royals coverage right when all this began. So when Diana came on the scene, when she was just 19, she was Shy Di, Lady Di, we called her. We put her on the cover a lot. And I was kind of on the case, as it were, from the very beginning. So when she died, it was logical and obvious that I would write, I would hope would be the definitive book about her death. I mean, it was such a staggering moment. It's hard to convey to people who weren't really around at the time. But and remember, it's 20 years ago, so there are people around who don't remember. But, she was center stage for 17 years, and all of a sudden she was yanked out, 36.
In doing all your research for the book, give us one startling detail to you that we would find absolutely fascinating when we read your book.
God, there's so many to choose from. I think the premonitions, let's just say this, the premonitions of not only Diana, but her friends, that she would die in specifically this way. It's people who went on record, people who warned her not to go to Paris as she was leaving, not to drive in a car through a tunnel. And this is all kind of
wow.
This is
so specific.
Solid info. So, and a number of people had the sense that exactly this thing would happen to her. And there was even a man who walked into a station in a village 24 hours before the accident. He was a very sober guy. He was like a university professor, and he walked in and said, this is going to happen. I don't know how I know it, but I know it. And the police wrote this down at the time. So it's kind of a cosmic thing. All of these are little details that make the story, I think, even more fascinating.
Right. And everybody can read it in the book. The book is called The Day Diana Died. Christopher Anderson, critically acclaimed author, 18 New York Times bestsellers, including The Day Diana Died. Thank you for taking time talking with us about Diana's 20th anniversary of her death this morning.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Nicole.